Let's go. Greg's got the news, Danny's got the flair. One talks the cloud, the other's out there. Servers spinning, bites keep grinning. Tech talk laughs, let's get the show winning. Cyberwise guys.
Welcome to Cyberwise Guys, where we break down the latest trends, threats, and technologies in cybersecurity, helping you stay one step ahead and cyberwise. Today, we are joined with Zak Morris, a cybersecurity and AI leader who previously led cybersecurity and AI initiatives within the Walmart's merger and acquisition organization. Now he's a partner with Luminark, helping organizations rethink how they approach cybersecurity in an era where speed, integration, and intelligence are everything. Welcome to the program, Zak. How are you?
Welcome, Zach.
I'm doing great. It's been a great week. It's been a bit of a fisticuffs Friday so far. Everything's kind of back to back, but it's a good kind of busy. So I'm happy to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Also, thank you for taking the time. Zak, if you wouldn't mind maybe letting people know who you are and what you've been doing for the past 2 years?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm a Northwest Arkansas born and raised native, which just happens to be Walmart's backyard, right? Home office.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I've been a technologist for 20 plus years. I kind of had an early relationship with technology thanks to my uncle having a computer repair company. So I was 7 years old playing with motherboards and a soldering iron and gorillas off the sea, off sea drop. So, early on, I kind of just formed a natural relationship. And that served me well along the way. I would consider myself like an artist who kind of survived a corporate technology career and go about things. I come at most things sideways.
Fair enough.
In a time of emergent capacity like now, it just turns out that I've been practicing making things that don't exist since I was 10. And now I can kind of make things real with the power of suggestion. So I'm able to sort of flex more creative capacities with functional technology. And that is stuff that I have actually, the last couple of years, I've launched an innovation studio and an innovation lab, and then formed a partnership with Luminark out of Little Rock, Arkansas, to do a lot of those things at scale. We even have a South Korean partnership.
Nice.
Just helping companies get here and helping companies from the US get there. But all of which, fundamentally, I spent 13 years at Walmart doing cybersecurity. I lived multiple lives in that organization and had the privilege of having access to world-class talent, global technology footprint, and went from doing security operations as an analyst, mostly at night, and went to incident response, went to threat hunting, went to mergers and acquisitions and international security at the end. And once I had got to participate in a platform design, that was kind of the neatest, biggest thing I was probably ever going to make. I was having a lot of fulfillment from doing town halls about AI, and I saw there was going to be a lot of trust work that needed to be done with an untrustworthy technology. And so I decided to leave and kind of start doing my own thing. And I've been doing that ever since, helping people just acting as a bit of an intermediary for people on a personal level, or companies or technologists wrap their head around it and fulfill their potential. So my studio's kind of moniker is help evolve the relationship between people and technology. I think that's a really important thing right now.
Nice.
I think, Greg, you and Zak have a lot of that in common.
There is some things there. Mine's more on the sales side now, but we do definitely share that security background from the beginning of working those late nights in the SOC, trying to figure out how do I close those 1,000 false positives that keep popping up every hour. So yeah, this definitely feel your pain on the early side, but yeah, that's fantastic. So I do have a question for you, Zak. So we're thinking about what you do when you're evaluating acquisition. What cyber risks are really overlooked in your opinion? And of those cyber risks that are often overlooked, which of those can really impact the deal value?
So boy, that's a nice lead off, buddy.
Hit you with the big questions first.
Absolutely. Why not? Let's just dive right in, shall we?
Right in the deep end, sir. Right at the Cyberwise guys. We don't mess around.
No, absolutely not. So I think one of the big gotchas is definitely documentation.
Okay.
There's so much work and brilliance that goes into even small companies, but then when it comes down time for things like assessment or evaluation, they don't have a lot of proof. And so in the middle of a transaction, suddenly you're actually trying to turn, the security side is often seen as overhead to the bottom line, right?
Right.
I think there's a lot of room to turn it into a value chip on the table in terms of where are we at for situational awareness, what controls, what level of resiliency do we have to modern threats, and can we prove it, right, in a meaningful way. And so I think one of the things that I found along the way is that most of the time there's a lot more there than they even quite understand, but it's not necessarily threat informed. So they're not even sure what bullies on the playground they're either well defended or not well defended against. They're not quite sure what they can see or not see because they don't quite have that inventory. And I think maybe inventory might be the word. Where are their endpoints? Well, you ask that question of what do you have exposed to the internet, and you get kind of a we're pretty sure this is it kind of answer.
Right.
When it comes to some of their controls and visibility, right? If we have identify, then we have detect. Can they even see the problem? They're not quite sure what they can see, especially if it's a smaller shop. And in these days, there is definitely a semblance of with the emergent now, we have an issue of we haven't quite all landed on the vocabulary yet. We haven't quite found a ground to stand on in terms of standards of what our mitigations and detections even look like and a generative type footprint. At the same time that something is quite emergent, it's become essential. So to be able to articulate where they even stand, even if they're a company building AI tools, by the way, it's an interesting statement that it's very diffuse. And I think there's a lot of shifting sand and moving yardsticks that most organizations are having trouble keeping up with, I'll say in general, but definitely when it comes to are we secure, the risk surface has become volumetric with the Z-axis of vector databases and everything that can be on the other side of that.
Absolutely.
And, I really feel like there's a value statement for the defense side, especially on the negotiating table. But I think the definitions of what secure really is right now and who can state that is, I think there's question marks for everybody. Right. So I think that's hard in a transaction space to interpret right now in particular.
So it sounds to me, Zach, that cybersecurity considerations, you've mentioned the assessment earlier, and the checklist of what they have and what they don't have should be in consideration or basically very early in the process. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes. Sooner, early or young organizations are actually going to have a bit of an advantage if they grow to be AI native and secure by design, and that they have security representation at that board level or at that C-suite level from the start. It will serve them very well in a time that trust is going to become kind of the ultimate commodity in many respects. I'm not saying it hasn't been before. I just think that the nature of trust will be different, and they are going to want to ensure that as early as possible.
So would it be fair to say that most companies, as far as you know at least, still treat cybersecurity as a checkbox that they need to fill in rather than truly consider this as a make or break deal?
Yeah, I think some of that has shifted. I think just the last couple of years, we see a lot more board representation. We see a lot more people with cyber experience at the board level, or let's say at the decision maker space. I will say there has been the premise that cyber is going to be something that is the industry of no, that gets in the way of the business, that gets in the way of the process, that slows them down. I would argue that especially right now with AI in particular, that governance is your momentum driver, and the controls and sense of security to explore in a secure way is actually going to help you speed up. I think the mindset has shifted some. I think there's still a long way to go because I think the perception of most, small startups, bootstrapping, garage bands, who can be really potent right now, especially if they're agent first AI native, are probably still kicking a number of the controls and observability down the road, and they're going to get to that later. I would really encourage anyone that's building something right now to start as early as possible and get some advisory at the very least, or some alignment with some of the standards that are emerging, and just keep some inventory and start showing that security and trust value as a statement of worth and why someone would leverage your tool set, whatever that is, because I think that is going to be even more of a value statement in coming years.
Yeah. So Zach, after, we've talked a little bit about what you look for before an acquisition. So I'm going to pose the opposite. So there's an acquisition that has occurred, and now we have all these challenges to really integrate security stacks and everything we're doing for security, identities, policies, all of this stuff. What are the biggest challenges for you during post acquisition? Now that we've identified that are our deal breakers, but now we got to integrate. What do you say is the most challenging thing there?
It's going to come down to like the term I call sheer. There, especially if it's like a larger company buying an innovative new idea. There's technology sheer. If the main mothership is an Azure shop and the company of brilliant minds is this great group that's come up with something really cool out of Canada, but they're AWS and they run mostly on Macs. If you pull in that talent group and suddenly they have to shift everything over to an entirely new serving platform, it's also a Windows shop, so they're going from Macs to Windows potentially, if that's what's issued. And then their way of working gets disrupted, you lose the magic. You're not quite getting what you thought. And what ends up happening is like this weird limbo stalemate where most likely that company wants to have mothership data and access to tools, talent, and information. And that's the idea, is to get that working. But if there's so much sheer that you lose some talent because they don't want to stick around for that organization and they don't feel like they can innovate like they were before. But you also end up having a mismatch of control footprint or parity, right? Parity. We can get a few things to you, but we can't get the full stack of security or visibility. Well, suddenly they no longer meet the requirements necessary to access vital information on the inside. So you kind of water everything down and they kind of stay out in limbo land for an integration time frame that is supposed to be 3 to 6 months, and it's always a year plus. So they end up staying out they end up becoming less secure in the process, not getting access to the data that they wanted, and a bunch of mismatches that cost a lot of time and money that could have been avoided in advance. Or maybe they weren't actually really that great of a target, but oftentimes, especially on the security side, we are at the whims of the decisions of the business, and you got to make do with what you can. But that's the danger zone that I see, is they get in this weird middle zone of kind of being integrated, but not enough to really fulfill the value that was anticipated.
So should something like this, which poses on one hand a risk, business and cyber risk, and on other hand a risk of kind of like water down the business, if you will, or the wow effect of that exciting new business, should that be considered as a deal killer and should not be approached at all? Or how would you view that?
I think so. A lot of times security teams don't get a lot of heads up when it comes to these things, depending on the nature of the market. Like, business has to move, they have to make a decision, they have to pull something in. I think often enough the assessment process or due diligence phase isn't given quite enough time, and they're not necessarily in a position to inform budget, to inform some FTE hours. Hey, this is going to be a bigger lift. We're going to need that company might not even have a proxy, right? We got to be able to extend the proxy licenses. We need to be able to fill these gaps, especially if there's a lot of sheer and there's not a lot of alignment. There might not be parity of controls or parity of observability. And if you don't have that, and you can anticipate that deal should include more concessions for the quality of code. It always needs to be refactored. It always needs to be updated to say maybe enterprise standards versus small, medium business that they were in, even in an acqui-hire situation. But it definitely could use more consideration in the earliest parts of that transaction so that they can facilitate the trust layer, the defense layer, the observability layer, and response. Let's say you take on a new healthcare group and it's the first time you're venturing into healthcare. There's just a lot more involved in a transaction like that than a 6-person chatbot, right? That's clever and they decide to buy it. And a lot of times these transactions from a security perspective are treated equally when they're not. And again, aren't represented in the budgetary effects, because most of the time with the transaction versus what's after the transaction, they operate out of different buckets. And there's just not quite enough language from the security basement or lab, if you will, up to those decision makers to inform the deal. And that's something I would really like to see more of. I think it serves everyone involved if that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that something that you brought into Luminark? Is that part of the services that you provide now? Those insights that, and again, not necessarily in the M&A field, but for businesses altogether.
Yes, part of, no matter what I'm doing or where I'm going, Security will be a fundamental, compliance, regulatory, any of those things that can surface as decision insights and situational awareness. And especially at a time right now where situational awareness has a shelf life of about 3 months. Not only are we coming in and helping them assess just where they are with emergent technologies and how the people feel about it, right? Because that's actually a big factor that a lot of companies are missing, and they're wondering why they're not getting 10x productivity with AI. They didn't quite involve the people enough early. But beyond that is some situational awareness with the best practices, and the best way to do AI security just hasn't had time to take shape, but we all have to implement it. It's just in our stacks now. So what we're trying to do is help bridge language from literally a case-by-case basis on here's where you're sitting so far on fundamental security. Here's where you're sitting with some of the mitigations and observability types that have surfaced that you are going to need. And at the very least, help them come up with a sense of strategy and budget moving forward. Hey, if you're going to be exploring and implementing these tools based off what you have right now, here's going to be a go forward, we'll call it bumper rails and electric fences, right? Here's some guidance of what you might want to do or not want to do. And we'll just take something like an OpenClaw exploration of saying, hey, you need to make sure you set up an air-gapped lab that you can get synthetic data over to and try out those features and figure out what you like, but don't plug this into your production systems, because we're already learning enough tales of terror and opportunity, right? It's very paradoxical. They're both bundled in the same package, but there's just a lot of sense of momentum, and they have to try everything out that's new, but they have no idea what they're capable of. And again, we just haven't quite formed enough vocabulary around it all yet. And that's something we try to bring to the table.
So that's interesting. I think I'm going to switch the topic now a little bit towards Luminark itself, because I've started thinking about what you just said and how Luminark operates in that space. With Luminark, what problem does Luminark uniquely solve right now? So what's its claim to fame, if you will?
Sure. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. I think so Luminark is actually, Lumen was based off being a lighthouse to illuminate the way. It's very foggy. I think companies feel like they have like knives at their back walking a plank because they have all this pressure from various angles, but they're playing a game of Minesweeper in front of them as to what the next steps are. We come in and evaluate. We do a diagnostic that's from a technology level to the people level, and then we turn that into decision insights based off of the current situation, and dynamically kind of inform them as partners. So each case brings to certain, I'll call it use cases that are more of a priority. Sometimes they're worried about their people and they want to recalibrate their people, and they're having really low adoption of internal tools, whether they're custom tools like real estate and finance. A lot of them have their own internal AIs already, but they're having really low usage. Or maybe they have Microsoft Copilot and they're still struggling to get adoption or momentum in any meaningful way. So we'll come in and help disarm that, right?
Nice.
Help align and calibrate people to leverage more of the potential and turning apprehension into curiosity is one of our unique strengths, whether that's the on the floor technician all the way up to the C-suite decision makers.
So how is Luminark different from other consulting firms out there?
I think one of the very first things is our experience. It's 4 people that have over 100 years of enterprise technology experience amongst us. Because right now, with the tool sets being able to handle so much of the execution, the critical thinking goes into the judgment, goes into the instinct, goes into we've been through some of these waves before, we've lived it. And you can have any tool look up anything, but that human instinct is one of the vital things that humans still bring to the table. And so we have a very specific judgment. We're also very diverse. We've got a person with 25 years at IBM, another one with 15 years at Microsoft, another one who's a startup junkie and is huge mentor for pitch competitions and things like that. So whether it's an enterprise or a small and medium business, we can tackle it. There's no scale or scope that's intimidating to us. And I think it's the potency of our composition. We really thought about the people, who we're going to be working with to solve problems. I think is a bigger part of the equation now that the tools can execute so much. So who you choose to work with to solve things, I think we've picked a really solid team, and we bring implicitly human judgment to very technical challenges.
Do you find that Luminark is investing in one area more than the other, say more in AI and identity or cloud, and any of those two, or is there you just sort of look at the whole situation and in the environment that you're advising, and you operate within that realm, or is there some area where you find Luminark putting most of its energy?
People, for sure.
People.
Every environment has their own. We're big off live off the land. Help companies use what they already have better. You don't introduce new tools and risk. You don't have to go through security review. Most of it's sitting there, and people are they don't feel aligned. And to be fair, there hasn't been much stability or convention to feel aligned to. And I think that's one of the more valuable bridges that we end up offering and starting to help those companies feel like they're starting to get a sense of compass where there was fog and a lot of uncertainty. So we might even be over-indexing on the people side, but that's because the technology is moving so fast that you're really planting your feet in any given area right now. What's the shelf life on that, right?
Right.
So a lot of exploration and exploring on people's behalf and then showing them what we figured out.
Gotcha.
So you've mentioned, I know you had a few publications about it, and you've mentioned OpenClaw earlier in the conversation. So for those who haven't seen and heard about OpenClaw, can you tell us a little bit about it, and why should security teams really care about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So think of OpenClaw was a milestone moment in a number of ways. If like DeepSeek was a milestone moment for open source last year, OpenClaw has been this year's milestone moment of Signal, where what they ultimately did was, so it's a harness, and you're going to hear that term a lot more. It is a facilitator of models and agents, and I'll call it AI capability, but in an agnostic container. They basically IKEA-fied what was a lot of people were putting together with duct tape and baling wire, all kinds of open source parts and pieces. It was very brittle, very, very fragile. And so what they ended up doing was providing a really neat Tupperware stack that organized agential function and did so locally. And you basically were either, if you didn't have your own shop to explore and enough hardware and compute power and a lot of, I'll call it overhead, and a lot of risk actually, you required on other outside services for that type of capability. And this kind of showed two things. Number one, it's out now at like 360,000 stars in a record amount of time. I think that's a big signal for the desire for sovereign AI. People want agency, and they want to hold the keys, and they want to control and steer a lot more off of their own systems. And this was kind of the first instance of an organized version of that, because within OpenClaw, you can run, if you have API keys or you've licensed out Claude, for example, well, you can plug that in and you can now orchestrate the behaviors and capabilities of Claude, but within this kind of controlled, organized fashion that just wasn't there before. So that's kind of why they call it a harness. Now we have others that have coming out, like, it of course spawned now we have all kinds of local options, right? Perplexity Computer. Manus now has a local version. Claude Code and Codex and Hermes is a really big one that's come out as an alternative to OpenClaw, actually. So we're kind of in this Cambrian explosion of competition. And I would say OpenClaw kind of establishes a new kind of species fork that has then spawned a number of subspecies and versions to include NVIDIA now has a more secure version. So corporate enterprise has paid attention and launched their own version of local open source harnesses, but with other controls and bells and whistles that people care about.
See, that's interesting, talking about these new technologies like OpenClaw. Makes me think back to the more traditional tools like the EDR, XDR, the typical tools that you see as part of a baseline of security in any environment. Are they really still fundamentally reactive to new technologies like this, or do we really have to assess brand new sources of detection and response?
The answer is yes. What I have perceived from the general vibe and some experience so far is that legacy companies, and I'll say legacy is anything older than 3 to 6 months ago. Legacy companies are certainly broadcasting that they are now AI ready in some capacity or support. I don't think they're actually keeping up fundamentally. I think it's too different and it's too unconventional, and they haven't had time. And again, we haven't even shaped the language around it yet. So we're back to a new wave of next gen, and with AI being plugged on top of it. I think they're struggling to really support it and prove that they can defend against much of this. They might just not even be in position, right? Maybe they're just their solutions just aren't in the position within a stack to do much about it. But there's also a confidence level, right? Like once we started, think about when we first started encountering polymorphic malware, where suddenly the MD5 hash and the SHA and the URL and the email it came from were different with everything. Well, then we needed sandboxing and we needed to look at behaviors and heuristics.
Right.
We're kind of back to that statement again, but we have not had time enough to observe enough of the behaviors to get down observables and then things to react to and then controls to deter it. Other than there's a lot of companies saying that they can defend against prompt injection and the guardrails are getting a little bit better. But honestly, most of those are sentences in markup files. And if somebody sends them a Russian poem backwards, it turns out that tricks them. So we're in a state now that it's no longer this binary defense and then extrapolations of binary, like psychological tactics work.
So how would you say that defenders, the blue teams, can operationalize the intelligence like in a situation like this, like in real environment?
So they're going to need as tight of a feedback loop as possible. Certain companies, I mean, Walmart's like world class, and there's no doubt. So I mean, their CI team is incredible, and not everyone has that privilege, right? So getting trusted feeds that are current for Intel, and there's firms that are kind of pivoting to specialize in some of the AI emergent. I don't know them offhand, but I know they exist. So that's kind of your provenance to signal, right? Your emergent signal, and then how quickly can you operationalize? So that certainly comes down to the internal training of the people, and are they up to speed with how to interpret that signal into something operational? And then secondarily, have they been given enough budget to explore and implement tool sets that are showing up very quickly? Some of them are legacy, and we have this new module or new add-on from Zscaler or something like that, right? Or Palo Alto that covers some of your bases for AI. But I kind of think of it in terms of Swiss Army knives and scalpels. And for AI and emergent tech, there's kind of a whole new workbench of Swiss Army knives and scalpels that they need. Some of them might be some, if you have Cloudflare, it's one of the better WAF layers in terms of AI stuff. So if you happen to be there, great. But there's going to be some new scalpels that they need, and they need some runway and some POC money and some training on the inside to stay effective, because again, it's kind of it's a world of shifting sand, shifting vocabulary, and the nature of this technology is different enough that you really cannot rest on your laurels and rely on your existing what I'll call conventional security posture to do much for you.
Right.
So you mentioned Walmart as an organization that has the capability and the team and the budget. How would that manifest itself in a more SMB environment, SMC?
So I think where you're more lean and agile and you're not quite as anchored down, where you're critical in your secure environments and your scale, let's say, is just, I'll call it much more manageable. You have a lot more latitude. Your risk surface probably isn't as big, so that's great news. But there's a lot more latitude to change some infrastructure fundamentals than larger organizations have. I always keep thinking, the big cargo container ships. And they're trying, they've, over the years, what happened? Every year we had specialty attack XYZ. And then what we bought was very specialized layers to layer into the stack, right? Especially when the more comprehensive security suites, just if you bought it, they were like 80% there of everything, but you needed to be 100%. So what we did was buy lots of disparate solutions and stacked them in. It makes it hard to change, right? You're tied into licenses, you're tied into infrastructure norms, and security likes it boring. When you're a big cargo ship trying to turn in a time that really rewards jet boat agility, and that is something that SMBs have at their advantage. And additionally, I think now that we can curate knowledge into function through sentences and conversation, what it takes to come up and conjure and deploy meaningful detections or controls, the effort's there's just not as much there to deal with. So you can respond. I think there's just more agility to respond, just as the product teams and business is thinking right now, we're smaller. we can be a lot more agile. That's why it's so important to have that security representation at the table, at the decision-making table, so they can respond with you. And that's definitely where the advantage point goes to the smaller companies right now, where obscurity will no longer save you, right? Security through obscurity.
Yeah.
Right.
And certainly getting to SOC 2 or some kind of compliance level is easier to achieve, but we also know that compliance does not equal secure.
Correct.
So with those realities acknowledged, there has to be this functional, dynamic, agile operation capacity that can reinvent themselves every 3 to 6 months. And if they set that in motion, go ahead.
So you've mentioned the agility and the flexibility of a small or medium-sized business. I think that where they're going to be behind, like enterprises, it's probably around the budget, which basically ties in their budgets are going to be smaller. Obviously, the organization is smaller and the budget is reflective of that, but that might cause some challenges. And where I'm interested to tie this into is you've mentioned like the different point solutions that you can pull in or pull out and rip and replace. What is your take on something like on customers, especially smaller organizations, leveraging platform?
So, I mean, I think affordability always has to be part of the equation, right? And depending on your license levels, of course, right, with that affordability, I think Microsoft just added yet another tier recently. It depends on the pay gate that you can reach. I find that, unfortunately, a lot of platforms pay gate vital details and logging at higher levels of business or enterprise paywalls that I would call fundamental security that might not be as affordable. And so that's sometimes where some of my ire comes from. And, they have their own business models. So of course they're trying to serve who they can. But I think for what companies need right now, even within a platform space that has a lot of tool sets in one roof, and that might serve you really well, and certainly leverage what you live off the land, leverage what you have. So much of it comes down to just features and configuration. And are they even aware that AWS and Bedrock have these security tools? And if you just go in and toggle one little thing, you suddenly have protection or detection that you didn't have otherwise. So awareness is a big part of it. But I suppose I'm also seeing a lot of really potent scalpels that are designed specifically for some of these emergent technologies that the platforms just have not caught up with yet. I call it the age of agency more than anything right now, because when we say age of AI, it makes it about the tool. I like reframing about what the tool provides us humans, and that's agency, which means choice. And with the notion of sovereign AI and why there's been such a response to tool sets like OpenClaw, those harnesses that are localized, as those become more effective on less and less compute, meaning more affordable for a small and medium business, they might be able to self-actualize and self-facilitate a number of these things that they otherwise would have relied on very expensive, maybe out of reach tool sets. And I'd rather them have something than nothing.
Gotcha.
So I'm interested in, I think in Danny and I, in our research to prepare for this, we came across the phrase, capability is the vulnerability.
Yep.
What does that mean?
So, perfect. We're in kind of this liminal space. The old rules and the convention is kind of crumbling in our rearview mirror in terms of being what we're tethered to as to what happens next. But the new rules haven't been made yet. So norms haven't been established. And right now, what we are injecting is profound capability within organizations. That's what's on the cereal box, right? 10x, 50x, 100x productivity, all these things. In order to do so, though, the gotcha is you have to connect it to everything that matters. And now I no longer need to come up with some sort of custom malware and invade your EDR and your all the classic file types. I just need to send you a document with the right instructions, because I know that you're likely messing around with some agential tech that might even have access to your C drive and your Google Drive and your Microsoft OneDrive. And it's also been connected to your calendar and your org charts. And I can just send a raven through the mail that will build my malware for me on the other side, because of course they all have coding capacity. In fact, that's one of the big sparkly things, isn't it? So I'm just going to bet on that. And so therefore, all of the capability and capacity that we are injecting and trying to help become more productive and efficient can be weaponized against you. That's kind of the great paradox of this species of technology, is every profound win can be leveraged at a lower barrier of entry than cost than ever before, day by day, and turned against you. I no longer need to try to get custom malware in if all I need to do is figure out how to pop your Google account and then have a conversation with your entire Google life from Workspace. And then have it email it out to me and go ahead and delete any of the evidence while you're at it, by the way. So that's what I mean when I say, certainly hire your conventional security people with a lot of experience, but I would also hire some artists while you're at it, because you're going to be dealing with artists who are mixing and matching malware and very attack platforms we're familiar with, and then sending them through you in PDFs and have it build the Trojan horse on the inside of the wall for it. And I don't think we're prepared for that type of battle just yet.
So can existing models like Zero Trust even prevent or handle something like this?
I think so. I just don't think that the identity and access management models tied to agents, tied to Zero Trust has been put together, connected just yet. I know there are some, I'll call it just ahead companies that are leveraging it. I know what Salesforce has, like I think a quarter of their staff that they would identify now are agents. So they must have some kind of IAM going on in the inside, and that must be connected to permission levels and then things that they can do, or tool calling, right? So no different than with Zero Trust would help with a contractor from the outside, and you say, great, this identity only has access to these knowledge stores and these tools from the inside, and that's very explicit. We have it. Most organizations, probably the 90 percentile, have not got that map on the inside. They're still in exploration phase, and they're connecting over permitted agents with lack of visibility. So right now, what is it requiring, right? Like a lot of these tools to be as potent as they say they are on the cereal box requires a lot of trust and access before we've quite set up the scaffolding to implement things like Zero Trust in meaningful ways. So right now it's a bit of a bypass, I feel.
So
it's going to get there. It's going to get there.
Yeah.
We need more time.
It sounds as though with capability versus vulnerability that maybe that we should be questioning whether there are certain capabilities that should exist within that capability.
100%. So when I say agency is choice, it's exactly even the scrutiny. It's saying we're going to stand up this crew of agents in this space, but it is a specific zone, right? What do we do with Wi-Fi, secure zones? Like that has to get defined with very specific tool calling down to an agent by agent level. And then there has to be awareness of their behavior, because it can't just be, certainly you're going to have vocabulary whitelist and blacklist type stuff, because a lot of it's conversational now, right? But there has to be awareness of the behaviors that they are eliciting, and are those behaviors expected, explicitly defined in some kind of agential SOP, and are they going outside of that? And then can you put words to those behaviors in ways that reactions can happen, whatever that is? We used to do this, right, with MDR coming in, or we'll call it, if a system came in and their DAT level wasn't high enough for their McAfee, and as soon as it logged onto the network, it would react to that, understand that, and say, hey, I got to put you in timeout for a second, right? So there's a sense of awareness and perception there of that endpoint, and then what to do with that endpoint if it didn't meet certain criteria. We have not had time yet to make that explicit for agents, the tools they're calling, the knowledge stores that they have access to, and the behaviors that they're eliciting to apply it, I think, some of the other Zero Trust functions that we've gotten used to over the years. And we're going to get there. It's just not there yet. So we're kind of in this, like I said, liminal space for the next couple years while everything's in transition. I think that's why it's so risky. It's profound capability, but everything that you're enabling to be capable of can be rather easily weaponized against you under the right conditions.
Zach, I feel like we can keep going and going. I'm sure Greg and definitely I have a lot more questions, but we're already at the top of the hour.
Sure.
Both of us would love to have you again to continue the conversation. But for now, as we're wrapping up, if you could go back in time to Zak Morris, what advice would you give him in the area of cybersecurity and risk areas?
I think I would have made a point to become a much more effective programmer. I got just good enough to be dangerous, good enough to understand it from like a malicious perspective, especially, right? Like that's what we're sort of trained to spot. But I think it's so important now, especially to meet compute where it is through its language and through that style, like computational thinking, like design thinking, is now a profoundly valuable skill. And I'm pretty good at systems design thinking, but I still don't quite know the nature of a programmatic adversary as much as I really should. I will say there's some bridging into those tool sets that can help me facilitate that. But I think the mental models and the discipline and true understanding of the red team and the seat on the opposite side would have served me much earlier. And I would actually have a lot more options right now than I do. And I still advise people definitely go get some programming under your belt, because whether you actually leverage that language or not, how it teaches you to think and how to think systematically helps you have better, effective conversations with emergent technology today.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And I look forward to having you again. I want to thank
Absolutely. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in to CyberWise Guys, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, and stay CyberWise. Thank you, guys.
Bye, buddy.
Let's go. Greg's got the news, Danny's got the flair. One talks the cloud, the other's out there. Servers spinning, bites keep grinning. Tech talk laughs, let's get